let me ask you something. How much longer are you willing to believe this is how the Portuguese speak? O João ligou para o restaurante e fez uma reserva para as 8 horas para 2 pessoas. This is an illusion. This is what I call Cinderella Portuguese. I'm not saying you have to choose between Cinderella or real Portuguese to speak and understand the language well, but to anyone who has some experience learning Portuguese, it's quite common to have your expectations shattered when you realize that what you hear and what you read sound like 2 different languages. Almost. It's almost as if you just marry Prince Charming or Cinderella and you think the person is perfect until you wake up to bad breath and bad temper. Another person. Olá, eu sou Catarina. Here at the Language Unschool, I'll help you master Portuguese in an organic and natural way. Yes, in a natural way. Now, I understand you need to hear words pronounced individually in a crystal clear manner, especially when you're starting out. But that's not how people actually speak. So today I'm going to explain the difference between Cinderella Portuguese and real Portuguese so that then you can choose which one you're going to use or to which proportion. But maybe I'm in a privileged position to be talking about this because I'm a native Portuguese speaker. I have learned 10 plus languages, but that's why now I have to tell you a story, because a few months ago, I took up Hungarian. In case you don't know, it's considered one of the hardest languages in the world, whatever that means. But still, I started by doing my usual anatomy scan of the language, trying to understand in which way it was different to the languages I already knew, which way it was similar, how it would be challenging to me. And unfortunately, vocabulary was one of them because it has no root that would help me understand this word means this, like cognates in between English and Portuguese you have. And grammar is quite tricky, which you can always learn. But still, there was one thing that was going to be easy. It's a phonetic language. So that means you can read anything in Hungarian. You can even, and you can, in theory, hear and understand what's being said. Until I came across this free course. And I enrolled for that, and the first email they start saying that spoken Hungarian is not phonetic. And my world just shattered, and the 10% easy aspect of Hungarian just went out the window. So I started paying attention what they were saying. The moment they start talking about connected speech, I started trembling of both joy and fear because that's exactly what I talk about in my program with my unschoolers about Portuguese. But I'm like, what do you mean in Hungarian as well? But of course, it applies to Hungarian. It applies to any language. When people speak, it means speed. And speed means the language is going to be used in a different way because speed does something different to the language. Now, back to Portuguese, I think it might be useful if I give you examples in English, assuming you're not interested in learning Hungarian, and then also in Portuguese so that you see that what happens in terms of connected speech in English happens also in Portuguese. So the first thing is letters that vanish, usually at the end of words. A formal term for this is an elision. So in English, you have used to. I used to. Now, the D and the T are letters that are pronounced in a very similar way in your mouth. So actually, it's only natural that D is actually going to disappear. So we actually say, I used to. I used to. You don't hear any D in the middle, do you? Same thing with Portuguese, but not with a consonant. That happens with a vowel. The E's at the end of words vanish, always. It's a done deal. So I'm not going to say frente, it's frente, frente. I end the word with a T sound, frente. So when letters vanish, it's only natural that depending on certain circumstances, it's going to marry the following word, okay, if it's beneficial for both. So in the case of English, you would have the example of this afternoon becomes this afternoon, this afternoon. There's no pause in the middle, is there? It is a marriage. In Portuguese, you have the example of preciso de ajuda, preciso de ajuda, preciso de ajuda. And then we have what is called officially an intrusion, which I prefer to call a child. It's a marriage with a child. So when you have those words that marry together, but then you add a sound in between. I agree becomes I agree. You have this y in the middle. I agree. Whereas in Portuguese, you would have que eu. Remember the final E vanishes. So it becomes que eu. Que eu. You have this E in the middle. Que eu. And this in Portuguese is done for the sake of emphasis. Then we have what I like to call letters that change. So because if a letter is next to a letter, it will influence each other, and one of them is going to change how it originally sounds, if it's in isolation or if it's in a different position of the word. So assimilation, that's the official term. In English, you would have the example of don't you, which becomes don't you. It changes completely to don't you instead of don't you, don't you. In Portuguese, we have the S in between vowels, even if it's two different words. You have os outros becomes os outros, os outros. And what about twin sounds, which I like to call double or triple A, and I even came up with a triple A sound example for you. But first in English, I want to. So you have two consonants that are exactly the same. It's only natural we're going to combine it into one consonant, but just longer sound. I want to. I want to. In Portuguese, I have ela está a adorar Paris, which becomes ela está a adorar Paris. Ela está a adorar Paris. So that triple A unites forces and becomes an open, slightly longer A. Está a adorar Paris. And what does this all have to do with Cinderella Portuguese, you might ask? So Cinderella Portuguese is Portuguese in which every single word is pronounced very clearly, perfectly well enunciated, highly articulated. And what this does is it protects you from real life conversations. And of course, you can be fine with talking only to your tutor or staying with the same textbook audio material. It is an option. Within my program, what I do to help my unschoolers bridge the gap faster between what they hear and what they read is use Cinderella Portuguese, but only as a tool and only in the initial stages. Back to our original sentence. Listen to the difference, first of all, in terms of intonation. And it really puzzles me why people use this kind of artificial intonation. I don't know anyone who speaks like this in real life. O João ligou para o restaurante e fez uma reserva para as 8 horas para 2 pessoas. If you know anyone who speaks like this, let me know in the comments. Just put Cinderella Portuguese. Now here goes normal intonation, of course with my own original accent from Cascais. O João ligou para o restaurante e fez uma reserva para as 8 horas para 2 pessoas. The highly articulated version strips out all the natural connected speech phenomena that happens when people use the language when they speak. This is the problem to my mind, why it's not beneficial to you as a learner to dwell much or ever in this form of artificial speech. And of course, you still have some of it, like the final S that becomes a sh instead of a s if it's at the beginning of a word, but that is minimal. And in simple terms, connected speech and intonations are two things that I equate to Cinderella Portuguese, which help you understand why you cannot understand spoken Portuguese. And I know that the jump from classroom audio material to real content like film series and so on is big. So what do? So you have options. You either give up or you go back to the safety of that tutor or classroom or course material, thinking that it's your lack of vocabulary and grammar that is the issue. It is not. Sure, they go hand in hand because learning a language is a complex thing. It is everything happening at the same time, but it is because you're not being exposed to real Portuguese in a supportive way. So you're not in an environment that helps you notice all those changing letters and words that get married and all that. And this stuff is overwhelming. If you jump into real life content without any preparation or support, it is hard. Not impossible, but it is hard. And it feels as if you're learning two different languages, the one written and the one spoken, and then perhaps the one even spoken in your textbook, 3 even. But now at least you know some, not all, of the connected speech rules that happens when the Portuguese speak. But I promise you something. You will forget all of this in 5 minutes. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. It's nice to know it intellectually, the logic, how things work, but you have to actually practice. Now, if you want to start practicing today, challenge you to listen to this story and count the times that I say pa instead of para. So the preposition para becomes pa all the time. And let me know in the comments of that video how many times you heard me say it. Boa sorte, até ao próximo.